Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of three amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. And Omari, we are 120 episodes in, and right before we recorded, I was like, hey, I got to get up the outline. I don't think I can read my intro if I don't have it was funny that it's become such a crutch to have that. So again, peek behind the curtain, like we just have an episode template, and it has my intro, your intro, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, the outro that you read at the end, and Wes just copy and paste that and then put stuff in. And because today is essentially a big board episode, I hadn't even looked at the outline because essentially we're just going to top the top 10 guys on our board or whatever. And I was like, oh no, I need that. I will definitely mess up the phrasing of that. You would think I could read it in my sleep, Omari, but I absolutely cannot. I would have messed that up bad.
No, I have to look up the closing part too all the time, even though it's the same handful of names every single week. I feel like I could do it by memory, but it would just be terrible if I forgot somebody. And then it's like, I forgot somebody. Like, that's not good. So it's kind of like when you open your calculator and add 2 + 2 sometimes. It's like, I know it, but I just got to see it. I got to trust it.
Yeah, you got to make sure. We are doing a big board episode. So we're talking Alex Sarr. We're talking Matas Buzelis. We're talking Zaccharie Risacher. We'll talk Dalton Knecht. We'll talk Nikola is my guess. This is going to be a board that is not Piston specific, but we'll obviously have plenty of Pistons twists and conversation that go along with each player. We're going to talk Nikola, even though he doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the Detroit Pistons. We'll get to as many guys as we can. If you guys have questions, comments, as we're talking through players, definitely throw it in there. If you have a player you want us to talk about, we'll probably get to him, but if not, maybe we'll get to him at the end. So plenty of time between now and the draft, obviously, but this is entirely an NBA draft episode. Outside of this, Omari, I do want to ask you, we've seen all 8 game ones of the NBA playoffs. We saw the Nuggets beat the Lakers. We saw the Celtics be the Celtics against the Miami Heat. We saw Dame go crazy against the Pacers. We saw the Timberwolves win by a bazillion points against the Suns. I believe I heard that every home team won game 1 over the weekend. What was your biggest takeaway from the NBA playoffs game ones?
I mean, for the most part, the better teams look better, right? It's probably one of the, like, I won't say boring because it's like playoff basketball. Like, there's always going to be some level of interest higher than the regular season game, obviously. But just the number of blowouts, I thought hopefully could add some more intrigue to like games 2 and 3, because we've seen teams come out cold and then they kind of get that jolt to them, like, oh, it's the playoffs. Like, we can't come out with that same level of effort, and then things change. But really the only truly great game I thought was Oklahoma City, New Orleans last night, it was 17-17 at the end of the first quarter or whatever. And just both teams were defending at such a high level. And then just the shot making down the stretch, like the block from Chet, just, you're seeing guys in their first playoff environment, like really both ways. Like, I know the Pelicans have had a bit more success, but none of those guys really battle tested either. So you have these 2 hungry teams, and just huge moments for Shea and for Chet Holmgren, obviously. So that game was great. And hopefully that's the tone of that series going forward, because I think New Orleans is probably a bit overqualified as an 8 seed, even, with Zion out and him being out, it's tough, but it could still be a really competitive series.
Yeah, so let's get into this. My big things were, I think that Mavs-Clippers game was surprising to me. The Clippers without Kawhi just go in. Terrence Mann and Ivac Zubats were incredible in that game, as was James Harden. And then also the Timberwolves just kind of manhandling the Suns and what a lot of people pegged as a tough matchup for them. So, and then also the Knicks and what they do. There's something I just really like about this Knicks team. So I think a lot of these game 2s, as you say, will give us a little bit better of a tone of the series. I know then game 3s are, the teams have to finally go on the road, and people will say that's quote unquote when the series really starts. But I think the response of some of these teams in game 2 will tell us as well. Before we get into players, we've already had a couple of questions that go somewhat hand in hand. So Matt says, what if the Pistons just refuse to make a selection? JK, he's obviously joking, but nobody in this class is worth the top 5 money. And then Sham says, what can Pistons, not the Sham, but what can Pistons get if they trade their number 1, assuming they get number 1? What's its value in a trade? Is it wise to have another young player? So let's just touch on this real quick, Omari, before we get into the players, because that is going to be important. And I texted or tweeted with somebody before we recorded that I think the one scenario, Omari, is a team falls in love with Alex Sarr and let's say the Wizards. I think the Wizards are the most obvious team with a need at the big man position. Maybe they don't love Donovan Clingan or something like that, and they just feel like they have to go get Alex Sarr. Now, the tricky thing is, how do the Pistons convince them that they are going to take Alex Sarr? You know what I mean? So if it's 1-2, why would the Wizards not just sit and wait for it? That's the one guy I think that a team would trade up for, in my opinion, is Alex Sarr. And that's the only scenario where it happens as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, there's just from talking to people, like there's a certain amount of certainty you have going in. Like, oh, like these picks probably have the most value, and in this draft, I would assume it's probably top 3, depending on if teams are in love with Sarr or maybe Risacher, or maybe you have a team that really wants to read Sheppard or whoever. Like, I know draft boards are really all over the board right now. A lot of that's really just going to come down to how the lottery shakes out too, because I think in a draft like this, you're going to have teams that just love certain guys and are going to take them regardless. But a lot of that's also going to be based on where they have a hole positionally. Like, you have teams that are set at center that probably wouldn't consider Sarr at all, right? So it does come down to that mostly. But I would say, if you're looking at guys who could have the right mix of instant impact and like long-term potential, like Sarr probably checks both of those boxes to the highest extent, given that probably day one, he could already be a pretty useful player on both ends just because of his instincts and his motor. But then you can look at his growth as a shooter, as a ball handler, this and that. And then you see how much the ceiling increases. So I know this isn't a draft where you always want the number 1 pick. This isn't like a number 1 pick or bust type draft, but just from the standpoint of the Pistons probably have interest in not adding another 19-year-old and like moving this thing forward a bit faster. And that's going to come up to the next president of basketball operations, or I guess they're calling it head of basketball operations. But it'll come down to whoever that is. But I could definitely see them top 3 pick. They just use it to sweeten the package, take advantage of a team that needs to shed salary because they lost in the first round of the playoffs, like maybe a Chicago Bulls or somebody along those lines. And there will be some opportunities there for sure. But I think we'll get a much clearer picture once we get past the lottery.
All right, so you mentioned it. Let's just go ahead and get it out of the way. Jay says, what's good, fellas? Any updates on the front office? Dax Hoops says, how does a team like the Pistons even plan for the draft without a head of basketball operations? I'll just say, like, you still have a full scouting department. So maybe you don't know who you're going to take. And at some point you have to have that plan in place, but they don't even know where their own pick is right now, right? It could be anywhere from 1 to 5. And so I think at the end of the day, as long as you're scouting, which I assume they are and have done all year, you can still have that stuff ready to present to whoever that person ends up being. But to the other question, real quick, Omari, any updates? I know the fan base is very intrigued and excited, I guess, with this.
No, I think we'll start to know more in the next week. They tabbed the search firm to kind of lead this process for them last week. So nothing to update right now, but hopefully next episode there will be something.
And Kyle brings up an interesting point as well. Also, the new head of basketball, I refuse to call it a hobo. Probably bring.
That's why I say it should be president, because just like
I'm not calling it that.
Like, you naturally want to say pobo, so it's only nice that you say hobo, which just sounds disrespectful. So I feel like they should go president in that head.
I'm taking a stand, and anybody who wants to come with me, Jerry Maguire style, you can stand with me on this. I refuse to call it that. I will refer to it by name once the person is hired, or head of basketball operations. I will not. But Kyle brings up a good point. They're going to bring info with them as well. You would think that whoever they hire for this position has done some of their scouting and have an idea roster building wise and all of that as well. So
yeah, and teams, like, I'll add that teams, regardless of what pick they have, like, they scout the entire draft.
Oh,
even if you poach somebody from a different team that's like outside the lottery or more in like the 10 through 14 range, like, it doesn't matter. Like, whoever they bring in is going to have done their homework and will be able to adapt to whatever the Pistons present. Even if they're like a different guy, like, they will have enough of a base to know who to pick.
And listen, this came up a few years ago. I think it was the Cade Cunningham draft when it's like, why are they bringing in Evan Mobley to work out? Well, what if Evan Mobley doesn't work with the Cavs? Don't you want that have sat down and interviewed him to have him in for a workout? So again, we'll talk about Nikola Topic at some point, Omari. Mm-hmm. The Pistons should absolutely try to bring in Nikola Topic to work out for them. Now, he may not do it. Like, his representation might say, like, this is a waste of time. Why would we send him to Detroit when they're not going to draft him? But look at James Wiseman. I have no idea if James Wiseman worked out for the Pistons, but you want to get as much information on all of these guys as possible for second contract situations, trade situations, all of that. So they should be doing their due diligence on every one of these prospects. Let's get into them though. Let's talk about them. Like I say, we want to try to get to 10 guys if possible. Let's start with Alex Sarr. I've talked a lot about him. I put a scout out. Guys, if you want to read my raw notes scouting reports, I'm putting those on the Basketball Bulletin. Trevor Lane and Keith Smith have been kind enough to let me contribute over there. So you can go subscribe and read those. And as we get closer to the draft, I'll start dropping them on the Motor City Hoops Substack as well. But Omari, your thoughts on Alex Sarr, the player, with no Detroit Pistons consideration at all, just Alex Sarr and who he is.
Yeah, he's my number one. Like, I look at a guy like that. He doesn't have the best shooting touch right now, but his touch around the rim, the way he can push the ball in transition, just the tools he has on defense, the switchability. He reminds me of Jaren Jackson Jr. a lot.
Okay.
Like, Jaren is not like the best shooter either, but he's good enough that you have to at least consider the threat of him shooting, and he could have nights where he heats up. And if Sarr could just get to that point, like, you're just talking like 34%. Like, you're talking a really good two-way, power forward / center, I think, for a long time. He's the guy in this draft who just checks both boxes for me as far as immediate impact and long-term upside. And I know this is like our personal big board and not our Pistons big board, but even for the Pistons, like, you have Duren and Isaiah Stewart, but for a guy to come in with those defensive tools immediately, I think you have to consider that.
So yeah, I want to clarify this. So we're going to go down my current big board, and then Omari will say like, hey, this is where I have this guy. I have Alex Sarr number one. And quite honestly, Omari, I did a recent community mock with our guy, Richard Stamen at Mad's Draft. If you guys aren't following him, it's time to do that. This is what this guy does this time of year. I took Alex Sarr, and part of it's going to be because the guys we talk about after this, Risacher has not shot the ball as well recently. Buzelis has some questions. Do you take Dalton Knecht number one? Do you take Sheppard number one? Those guys have flaws of their own, as we'll talk about when we get to them. So I just took Alex Sarr, Omari, because he is the number one player on my board. Like, I am very, very close, and I've bounced back and forth doing this, of putting him in his own tier. Right now, I essentially have a tier of like 10 guys that we're going to talk about because Rob Dillingham could go 10 or he could go 2, depending on, like you said earlier, where the draft lottery plays out. So you said a lot. I think defensively, I'm really excited about the ground he covers. I've always been higher than everybody else on his offensive potential. This was a guy, when I started my foundational deep dives this past offseason, I was like, why is this guy not being talked about more? And everybody said consistency and all of that. So real quick, the numbers: under 9.5 points, 4.7 rebounds, an assist, half a steal, 1.5 blocks, 1.1 turnovers. Here's the thing you got to remember, guys. He was playing in a professional league in the NBL and not even playing 20 minutes a game. So 50% from the field, 28% from three, just under 70% from the free throw line. There is some like real offensive potential there. It's not realized at all, Omari, but this guy moves really, really well. I've often comped him to Evan Mobley. The Jaren Jackson Jr. one is interesting as well, with, especially with Jaren not being a great rebounder, actually needing to play next to a bigger 5-man. I can see that a little bit. Depending on who you talk to, depends on whether let's talk about the Pistons fit. 1, do you think he can play with Jalen Duren? 2, do you think it matters? Like, do you just draft him and figure it out? What are your thoughts with Alex Sarr and the Pistons specifically?
After a 14-win season, I say you just could not consider position at all. And I know people would think about all the resources they've invested in the center over the last 4 years, and like, sure, like, that's enough to make your stomach hurt, given how much they've sacrificed to not get what they need from that position anyway. But I think Sarr is just the type of guy that you just take, you figure it out later. You just cannot afford at all to consider position at any point. Like, we both agree that he's the guy that if you have number one, you just take him and figure it out. He's just, to be such a good modern 4, and that you really need a 4 who can handle a variety of defensive assignments. I think you need that versatility in the front court. And it's like Jaren, right? Or Mobley, like, those guys can play the 5, but you probably want more of a 4 next to them. And Mobley's not really that great of a shooter at all, but it works next to Jared Allen just because of how stifling they are defensively. And obviously you have to have enough scoring around them to make it work. But I got to look at Duren and Isaiah Stewart now. And granted, Isaiah Stewart shot the ball really well last season, but he doesn't really give you what Sarr gives you as just an all-around scorer. He has a bit more size, a bit more athletic. I think there's upside with him and Duren, especially since Duren is such a dominant rebounder. You can just tell Sarr, hey, just go out there and just
That's fair.
Just go out there and play free safety, basically. Like you can just really have him as a roamer, knowing that Duren's going to gobble up a lot of rebounders. So I think it works great personally. Like it's not perfect, but compared to where you are, like that's going to get you a lot further.
And I do want to get to other guys, so I don't want to stay on Sarr for too long because I'm sure we'll talk about him a bunch. A week ago, I think it was, Wes, whenever I was sending those pictures to you, I had kind of like looked at lineup data and I found a way, and like this wasn't like, breaking stuff, but to get both of them 30 minutes a game, and you only had to play them 12 minutes together, right? So you could essentially start the first half with them together, the second half with them together, all of that. And so I think, and in those minutes, like just don't have a Sarr on the floor, right? Don't have Jaden. Like those are the minutes where you have to have, say, Quentin Grimes, hopefully spacing the floor better than what we saw, and Simone Fontecchio. So I think there's a rotation there. I think where it gets a little bit convoluted, Omari, is how many minutes does a Sarr have to play at the 4? How many minutes then do you find for Isaiah Stewart and all of that? So it is interesting. I do think it can work. You got to find the right rotations with it right now because of how I feel about some of these other guys. Like I just am not comfortable taking anybody over him at number 1. Steven Suggs said, we really want to hitch our wagon to Duren. Honestly, he's not the be-all, end-all of centers. Get Sarr, trade Duren. I wouldn't say immediately trade Duren, but I don't mind the idea of bringing in more competition. Listen, if we haven't seen this Troy Weaver love for centers over the last 4 years, I don't even think this would be as big of a conversation, right? Like it's just, Troy Weaver drafts another big guy. So that's Alex Sarr. Number 2 on my list still, Omari, is Zaccharie Risacher. Now, again, like, I know for some people he's really dropped. For others, not as much. This kid is averaging 10.5 points on 46% from the field. He is down, quote unquote, down to 39% on 3.5 attempts from 3, 70% from the free throw line, 3.5 rebounds, an assist, a steal, turns it over 1.5, 23 minutes a game, again in a professional league overseas. He's played 53 games this year, and he just turned 19. So he played the majority of this season as an 18-year-old in a professional league. I do give that some credence. I know a lot of people don't like the age thing, Omari. I think you have to consider it in some context in some of these situations. Where are you at with Zaccharie Risacher?
You do. It's funny. So our lists start the same at number 1. I know we talked a little bit before the pod. They both end the same around 10, 11, which I know we got to hurry up and so we could actually try to get that deep into it. Risacher, he was my number 2, but in the past few weeks, he's fallen all the way down to number 5 for me.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is because like I do give him a little bit of extra credit for how young he is. Like that is appealing, like 6'9", solid athlete. His shooting really fell off the back half of the year, but mechanically I still think he's going to be pretty good. Like he's decent at the line. For me, if he's not hitting shots, what else is he giving you? No, and I kept thinking about that, and that's what I kept coming back to. If he's not hitting shots, let's say he just ends up being around like a 38% shooter. Is his ceiling higher than a guy like a Cam Johnson, who is pretty good defensively, and I think he's a much better defender than Risacher is. Granted, Cam Johnson was also like 23 or 24 when he was drafted, so you're talking about like a 6-year difference in development. Like it's nothing against Risacher. For me, it's just more so I think there are guys who give you more immediately, and it's tough to talk myself into that much of a project, just given that he hasn't shown those other things you want to see yet.
No, that's fair. And this is why, again, if he was still shooting 45% from 3, I would probably have him number 1 on my Pistons specific board, right? And that's why in this recent mock, I took Alex Sarr. The thing is, he's still shooting almost 40% from 3 as an 18-year-old. Where I've gotten a little frustrated is everybody's like, oh, look at the last, just look at the last month. Well, look at the whole season. Isn't that why we want to see these guys play a whole season, is to get as much data as possible? Now, if he finishes off the year and it's down to 35% and he drops below 70% from the free throw line, sure. To answer your question about what else he does, I do think he's a good defender. Okay. I think he will guard on that end of the floor. He has good length. YouTube user asked about athleticism. I would say average. I don't think he's going to blow you away. I've seen him miss some shots around the rim where it's like, man, I wish he would have been a little more explosive. And then I've seen some impressive ones as well. But he's not just – I had an NBA scout say, call him the French Trey Murphy III. I don't think he has anywhere close to the bounce that Trey Murphy
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, but that's the archetype and role of player that I think people are evaluating him as. And so what I will say, Omari, is he does cut off the ball well. He offensive rebounds well. He has the knack for those things. And I have in my notes, he just plays the game the right way. And I know often people don't like hearing that. It's kind of coach speak, but I just watch him and I'm like, oh, I kind of like that. I will also say I recently went and watched just all of his field goal attempts, and he was doing some stuff off the bounce that it was at least intriguing, even if he wasn't finishing. I know there was a graphic that was put out recently by No Ceilings where he was very low on field goal percentage at the rim in the half court. You also have to consider attempts in that context. Cody Williams was at the top of that. He's only attempted 50 his entire season at Colorado. So there's some other context, competition, and all of that as well.
No doubt. And I like Risacher as a prospect. It wasn't like I was watching them and I just like soured. It's just, I think especially in the tournament, there were some guys I like more anyway, but especially in the tournament, I think some of those performances really did bump a couple guys a little bit higher for me, which we'll get to in segment 2. We're going to close out segment 1. When we get back, we're going to try to get a bit more rapid fire with these and get through the rest of our respective draft boards. All right, we're back with segment 2. Bryce, unless you have any more pressing Risacher thoughts, so I'm curious to hear what your number 3 is.
Yeah, so I have Matas Buzelis, number 3 here on my board. So we're
so different.
Okay,
all right,
so
go ahead. Yeah,
you have him. No, where do you have him? I assume you have him low. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Again, real quick, my line. So on my board, I have 84 players ranked. Omari, I have tier breaks. I have like strong black lines that break tiers. It goes to 10. So again, I'm not going to quibble with somebody who has Matas Buzelis 10.
So it's all pretty similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty similar. Yeah.
There's little things. It's going to be team specific, all of those things. So where do you have Matas and what do you think about him?
So I have Matas. Let me put my list up here. I have Matas number 9, but I do feel like the gap between 9 and like maybe 6 or 7 is like really not that big at all. I like Buzelis. To me, he is just like a B to C tier version of what you're getting from Alex Sarr, if that makes sense. But I do want to hear your evaluation of him first.
So I think Matas is a versatile wing. And I think he's going to be a forward as his body fills out that can dribble, pass, and shoot. So I think that's the intriguing thing with Matas Buzelis is there's real dribble, pass, shoot. For some reason, Franz Wagner is like the favorite comp for all of these guys in this draft. I don't necessarily know why. Matas has a little bit of that on the offensive end. I don't think Matas is going to be that guy on the defensive end. Here's what keeps me intrigued. The 3-point shooting was not good with the Ignite. He shot 27% on 3.3 attempts, 70% from the free throw line, but his rep coming out of high school was as a floor spacer along with these other things he could do. And I'll be straight, honest, and blunt. I'm giving all of the Ignite guys a bump. Every single one of them. Matas, Ron Holland, Tyler Smith, Almanza, if he stays in, all of them, because it was a disaster down there for that team. I've heard the developmental stuff was not good. There's a reason the NBA got rid of it. So I'm giving Matas just a little bit. There's a section of like intersection of size and skill with him. And Omari, I do think he's probably better than what people give him credit for defensively. I think he'll be really good off the ball defensively. He's got some slow feet on the ball, but he gives second effort. He has good length. I don't love him. He has issues, but I'm still keeping him here for now.
I like his game. You mentioned giving a bump to the Ignite guys, which I'm struggling to figure out how much of a bump I want to give. And I think I end up looking more at like physical traits rather than stats because of that. Because it's just, again, like they had no shooting, no spacing. It's just
no point guard, no point guard at all.
You know, so you're asking so many guys to do stuff that you're not going to ask them to do in the NBA. So I guess to some extent you try to praise guys for what they did rather than what they didn't do. But again, I think that's just a really tough evaluation, which is why I probably have them a bit lower, which again, I think our tiers are probably similar in that the gap between 5 and 9 is probably insignificant. I do buy into him defensively near the rim. Like I think like his instincts, like the block rate, like I think that's going to hold pretty steady. Like I don't know if I trust him like switching
almost 2 blocks a game. Real quick, Omar, just almost 2 blocks a game and just under a steal a game, just to give people some reference. when you go look up Ignite stats, guys, make sure you go to the full season stats as well. So if you go to Real GM for stats, they separate it into regular season and G League Showcase Cup. Make sure you look at the full season stats. Sorry to cut you off.
I hate how segmented G League stats are. I feel like I have to go to two websites.
It's so annoying. They have to fix it. It's so ridiculous. It makes no sense.
It's like it should not be this difficult to figure out what a guy averaged in like sample size that's bigger than 15 games. But yeah, like defensively, I buy into him completely as like a 4, but I think you probably need a floor spacing 5 next to him to really maximize his value there. Which would be problematic for some teams fit wise. I don't know if he quite crosses that threshold of like you don't worry about fit at all. Like you just take them like I do with like some.
So do you not buy the jumper? I think the disconnect with Matas for most people is going to be, do you buy the jumper or not? Where are you at with, I know the numbers don't look great. I'll give you the high school numbers. He played at Sunrise Christian. He was 43% overall on 100 attempts. He was 43% on catch and shoot. He was 47% on unguarded in his senior year at Sunrise Christian, which is where Grady Dick went to high school as well, among other really good players.
Like, I kind of wish I had seen more volume from him. Like 3.4 attempts per game is like fine. Like 26%, like that kind of makes you wonder a bit. And then he also shot 70% and he only had like 2 free throws a game. So he really wasn't getting to the line much as well. Which again,
remember the Ignite has the funny rule though. They shoot 1 for 2.
That's true. Yeah, they do shoot 1 for 2 because I remember seeing that for Scoot last year. Like, but then I was like, oh yeah, like they don't have the same rules we have, so that'll be a little bit different. I like him as a prospect. I don't love him. I think he's not like a focal point shooter, but he's a guy you probably won't want to leave open to. If he were like a little bit of a better athlete or shot it a little bit better or had a little bit more of like I know all those guys have really bad assist to turnover ratios just because of spacing. Like I'm not counting that against him. He's a tough evaluation for me. Like I'll leave it at that. He's a tough evaluation. I like him, but there's other big prospects I like a lot more.
I think YouTube user says I like Matas way more in theory than on tape. I think that's probably fair. I think that's probably where I'm at. And maybe I'm overvaluing the theory of what he can be over what he actually is and just kind of buying into it. I will readily admit that. So number 4 on my board, Omari, is a guy that the Pistons should not draft at all. But I have number 4, and that's Ron Holland. So I have him number 4. Where do you have Ron Holland out of G League Ignite?
I like that. I have Ron Holland 8.
Okay. Wow. This is going to be really good.
And he's another guy I struggled, but he's actually one of my favorite guys in the draft, even though I only have him at 8. And that's more so me not having the guts to move him higher yet. But he's so athletic. Like he's such a great downhill athlete, especially at his size. I think he's a really good and really willing defender. He's a really strong rebounder. Like again, like the block steals numbers, like athletically, I think he just really, really pops defensively. And I think that's really going to translate for him early. Along with that, like even though he did not shoot the ball well by any means, he's 24% on 3.3 attempts. He actually kind of made up for that because he was like so much better at the rim. He's just a freight train getting downhill. And when you look at it, also he shot 73% at the line. It's like when almost 4 attempts. Like he got to the line, hit his free throws pretty well. Even if the shot doesn't come, that makes you feel better about it because he's probably going to be a foul magnet in the NBA. Like I could just see that part of his game really, really popping with some spacing. He's also was a willing passer. Like again, turnovers were a bit high, but he was a very, very willing passer. I think that part of his game could translate pretty well. Like he gives you pretty much everything as a wing that you would want except the shooting. And it's like he shot so well at the line that I actually feel a bit better about him as a shooter than some other guys. Like mechanically, he's got to speed his jumper up. There's some mechanical stuff he has to work on, but yeah, like what QT says, like 4 or 5 years down the line, I could just see him being the best guy in this draft by like a wide margin. And I really love his game. And I think he'll probably be top 5 for me before it's all said and done.
Yeah, one of the teams I like sending him to is actually the Wizards if Alex Sarr isn't there or Donovan Clingan, because I just think that they could kind of go for an upside guy, right? Like take a swing on a guy that really could truly become the best player in the draft. I mean, if he really shoots, and this is a very highly recruited player out of high school, like he was big time recruit, had a big time reputation with how hard you don't often hear about high school kids and their defense and how intense they play on the end. Now there's it's a little bit of what I felt with the Sarr and Amin coming out of overtime elite, where I thought they had some issues in terms of like the fundamental types things, but we haven't seen that be an issue in the NBA, Omari. Like both of those guys were really good defenders. And so I think it's something I've learned where if there's guys with the athletic tools, they are engaged, they work hard, show some of that stuff. I really like what he can do on the defensive end, and he really gets after it. I'm also glad you pointed out the passing. He will get the reputation of being selfish because of the assist to turnover ratio. He is not selfish. He may make he may make some bad decisions, but he is not selfish. I also don't think he was in a great role with the Ignite. I think Ron Holland is a true off the ball guard / wing, probably more of a wing. I don't think he's a forward that attacks off pin downs and zoom actions and gets out in transition and those type of things. I don't think he should have been playing with ball in hand as much as what they were asking him to do.
No doubt. And another thing, he gets the Risacher bump in that he's younger than Risacher. He will still be 18 years old on draft night. So you're basically taking a guy who was probably just a couple months older than Jalen Duren was, I think. Like Duren turned 19 like that November. Ron Holland turns 19 a few days after the draft, like a week after, I think. This dude's so young in a bad environment. He's still really, really popped. Like, but it's all said and done. He probably will be top 5 for me. I think if he had gone to college, like he'd probably be an unquestioned top 5 guy in this draft.
I'm glad you brought that, because that was one thing that I've said about Matas from the beginning. I never thought Matas going to the Ignite was a good decision. I want to touch on this real quick. V. Clark asked this earlier. Should we prioritize drafting a power forward before drafting a small forward? So just quick thoughts on that, Omari. Based on the current roster, would you rather have, a true 4-man, which is honestly kind of hard to find at the top of the draft, depending on what you think about Matas. Most of these guys are more 3s. The first 4-man, you're looking at Tijon Saloon, Tyler Smith is somebody I brought up earlier. Or do you think it is kind of these true wings, these 3-men like Risacher? I think that's truly what he is. Holland is a wing before he's a forward. Dalton Knecht is a wing before he's a forward. What do you think would be more impactful?
I think it just really comes down to the player. Like if you're number 1, you just take Sarr, but he's much more of a power forward, obviously, than a wing, but you just take him. You really can't go wrong either way when you look at the guys who fit that mode at the top of this draft. I just say just take the best player either way, because likely you're going to address one spot or the other, either through free agency or the draft anyway. So to me, in this draft, you just take whatever prospect you think is better there, but you have needs up and down the roster, right? So you really can't. The bigger needs probably at power forward, but to me, the gap's not big enough for any guy in this draft to where it's like, oh, well, I like this small forward more, but we need a power forward more, so I'm going to take him. Like, I'm just taking whoever the best forward is regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only person or archetype you don't take is a primary on-ball guy that can't play off-ball at all. Like, Cade Cunningham is there. He wants to be on the ball. I didn't think – I have to bring this. So, organic, where would Killian go in a draft this week? Killian Hayes fan on Twitter says Killian is going first. So, I didn't think we'd get some Killian Hayes conversation in the comments. But
there's going to be Killian Hayes talk, but there's Killian Hayes fan in the chat with the Killian Hayes Avi.
Yep, I love it. Okay, number 5 for me is Nikola Topic, the point guard from Serbia. He has not played a ton of games, like 19 games, because he was going to go play in a bigger league overseas and played like 3 games, I think it was, and then got hurt. This guy is a pick and roll maestro, great passer, great processor of the game, all of those things. There's some questions about the shot, but he's almost 90% from the free throw line, under a 30%, from the 3-point line, 50% from the field. There's some question marks with the defense. I think that's probably my biggest worry with Nikola Topic is the defense. This is another guy the Pistons have no business drafting whatsoever. This is just my personal board. Where do you have Nikola Topic?
Yeah, I have Topic number 6, and I kind of went back and forth between him and Castle for that 5 spot.
Okay.
Topic at 6, and I'm sure we'll talk about Castle here soon.
Yep.
Topic, I like his game. I think his touch around the rim is just so good. He can finish from so many different angles. You talk about the lack of burst he has, but I think he makes up for it with his touch and his size. Not a great shooter, but again, like his touch at the line implies to be that he could at least become a passable shooter. Like he's not probably going to be like a 42% guy, but 36, 37%. Like I'm pretty confident he can get there. His handle is really good. I just feel good about him being a pretty solid all-around point guard. Like defensively, he's not going to wow you. Athletically, he's not going to wow you. But pretty much all the other aspects of his game are there. And he's really young too. Like he's even younger than Ron Holland.
He doesn't turn 19 till after Summer League. He will play Summer League as an 18-year-old. And again, I know some people, like even NBA draft people will like I saw it on Twitter the other day about Jaime Jaquez. Guys, if people don't want to calculate age into this stuff, that's fine. I do. I think playing as an 18-year-old in a professional league is not the same as being a 22-year-old playing Division I basketball, as it's not the same as being a 19-year-old playing in the G League Ignite, Omari. Like, I just think that stuff should be involved in the conversation, at least in some way.
It should be. I mean, yeah, just the age. She's so efficient inside the arc, like really, really good at the line. Like, I just have no question that he's going to be a pretty solid, at least above average guard for a long time, just because of how well he maneuvers the pick and roll and just how good he is inside the arc. Like, I think the shot will come. Like, he's one of probably 5 or 6 guys this draft that I feel pretty good would be plus NBA players.
Yeah, I mean, in my notes, pro teams were doubling him. Like, that's how good he was operating and breaking down defenses. I watched a game where he was really bad in the first half, had a really rough. And I put in my notes, Omari, literally, I said, I love these opportunities to scout players when they have a bad half or a bad game, and we get a chance to see how they respond. And my notes for how he responded, unbelievable, impressive response in the second half. Made 2 threes, made a mid-range, attacked the basket, all of this in the third quarter. And that was one of those games where I was like, man, this really stood out to me in the way he responded to that. And so Nikola Topic, I think somebody's going to get a real steady, solid point guard, maybe not crazy upside. Like, it's not like it's Luka or something like that, but a very good point guard to run their team, attack off ball screens. I think he will compete defensively. And like you say, he's very young. So
yeah, like I imagine the Spurs getting him and pairing him with Wemby.
Sure,
and it's just
absolutely.
like, well, there's the next 15 years,
Yep, I love it. Yeah. All right. Next guy on my board at number 6 is Reed Sheppard. So where do you have Reed Sheppard?
Yeah, though I think I'm higher on Reed and probably the consensus right now. I have him number 3.
I love it. Yeah. No, I don't think that's crazy. I think a lot of people do. My thing with Reed Sheppard is I think there is some fit stuff there. My biggest question, like, we'll get to all the positives. I'll let you sell Reed Sheppard. Not that he, we all kind of know.
Yeah.
I worry about the on-ball defense, Omari. Like, I have real questions about somebody that's 6'3" that I'm not sure is going to stay in front of NBA players that well, even though he has amazing hands. He had blocked shots in college, did a lot of really, really disruptive things on the defensive end. I do have a little bit of worries about how he guards on the ball. But I mean, if he shoots 50% from 3, it doesn't matter, right? Yeah. Like, this kid can absolutely light it up.
Yeah, it's just like, he will give up some size on defense. He's like 6'3", like not the biggest 6'3". So you're going to have some issues there for sure. For me, just how good his hands are.
Sure.
Just like, to be like, I still feel pretty good about it. Like, you do have guards who give up size, but they're just so pesky that, they're still going to make an impact, like a Fred VanVleet, right? And like, Reed is bigger than Fred VanVleet. He was just so absurdly efficient last season, just like mind-blowingly, like, how do you do this over 33 games efficient?
Yep.
Like 53.6% overall, 52.1% from 3. More than half of his attempts were from 3. Didn't get to the line a lot, but 2.5 steals, 4 assists, positive assist to turnover ratio. Like, you could just pair him next to Cade Cunningham and just be absolutely set in your backcourt. Like, just absolutely set. If you're going to pair him with a guard smaller than he is, you want a guard like Reed Sheppard, who's just going to absolutely stretch the floor and just give defenses fits because of how far out they have to guard him. And he can handle secondary playmaking. Like I just look at him and I'm just like, this dude, like, is going to be one of the best players in this draft one way or another. And I almost look at him like I look at a guy like a Desmond Bane, where at some point the numbers just outweigh the concerns. And for me, his numbers are just so good. Like, he's one of the only guards I would take in this draft if I am the Pistons, just because I know I have so many guys back there already. But I just have no question in my mind at all that Reed Sheppard and Cade Cunningham could be a winning backcourt as long as you do what you're supposed to do at the other positions.
So, yeah, I mean, and one thing is he is 19. He'll turn 20 this summer, I believe. He has a June birthday, so a little bit older for a freshman. So we have no concerns about Sheppard being an undersized, complete no-show in the tournament. My response to that is
go
look at Brandon Miller's NCAA tournament from his freshman season? And then do you think that should have kept people from drafting him too, or had any effect on his rookie season?
Yep.
So
it's one game.
It's one game.
One game.
At the end of the day, Wes says he has Reed Sheppard number 3 as well.
That's
so,
right.
I don't have any huge takeaways from him not being great. We have a sample size, Omari, you said it, of 33 games, and he plays in the SEC. So with all due respect, like, I love small school products. Like, I absolutely love them. One of my favorite players is Deron Holmes II out of Dayton, the A10, not like the most popular. And people are going to crush him because he played in the A10. But at the end of the day, Reed Sheppard played in the SEC for how many ever games of his season. And this dude shot 52% on almost 4.5 threes a game. That's the sample size that I'm willing to believe in over a 1-game sample against a team that plays the wonkiest defense, one of the wonkiest defense you'll find in college basketball.
Yeah. Last point on just not counting the NCAA tournament when it comes to these things. Like, I remember Kevin Durant laying an egg in the tournament, and ever since then, I've just never really paid attention to that ever. Like, if it's a bad performance through one game, I don't worry about that at all. I think a sustained good performance through the tournament can raise a guy's stock in my mind. One bad performance won't.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Let's, I have one more question on Reed, and then I'll let you take it. So I want you to answer this and then take us to break, because you did so smoothly during the first segment. So we'll see if you can. That's
my responsibility now. All right.
How much do you think he can play on the ball? Because I think this is the ultimate upside. So people like, Organic says undersized Luke Kennard, cool. Like, so obviously he's not excited about him top 5. I get it. Somebody else said, like, you want to go, YouTube user says, where could Sheppard be above average besides shooting? Like, I get all of this. So this is the thing for me, and probably why I tend to agree that I'm a little bit lower. I don't think he has the on-ball juice. I think he can be a secondary creator, like a second side creator. Do you think he could be the second creator? Like, Cade comes out of the game and now Reed shifts to point and he runs the show.
I think Reed, if I'm the Pistons, I think Reed is probably a better playmaker than a lot of the players I currently have behind Cade. So that's the difference maker for me. Like, he is not going to be like 8 assists, 2 turnovers or anything like that. But I think he crosses the threshold of, if he's your lead playmaker on the floor, you probably feel pretty good about it. Like, he's probably not like a supernatural point guard, but if you can just get like combo guard playmaking, like, you just need him to man it for like 12 to 14 minutes a night, like, I think you're in pretty good shape.
Real quick, I would rather put the ball in Jaden Ivey's hands. I know
that's
that
fair.
This is why I'm just a tad lower, right? Is I think there's real on-ball questions, and I don't see the on-ball creator. I love all of the other stuff. So take us to break, Omari, and then when we come back, we'll get to as many guys as we can.
Yeah, I think we have 4 guys left, right?
So I would be at numbers. Yeah, so we'll get 7, 8, 9, 10. Probably going to need to talk 11 a little bit, because I think people are going to be pissed at us for where we have that guy. So we definitely need to talk about him.
All right, cool. We'll go to break. We will go to break. All right, we're back. Segment 3. We have 4, potentially 5 more players to talk about, and we have let's just call it 20 minutes. Let's try to do this as fast as we can.
So here it is right here. Zubop says Cody Williams is my pick if we fall to the top 3. This is the guy you guys are all going to be pissed at us about. I can tell you guys right now, my number 7 is Dalton Knecht. And this is a guy that older prospect, right? He just turned 23 a few days ago. Actually, I will say I give Dalton Knecht a little bit of a different eval than, say, Kevin McCullough, who's a guy at Kansas that's been like 5 or 6 years in college, have all been at big time Division I programs, major conferences. Dalton Knecht was a late bloomer in high school. Dalton Knecht went JUCO out of high school. Then he went to Northern Colorado, which, like, Northern Colorado has all of a sudden become this hub of sending guys to higher levels. They have this kid, St. Thomas, who just committed to USC. But point being is he hasn't spent 5 years in a major conference Division I programs, weight room, defensive system. Like, if he was 5 years at Tennessee, Omari, and still this bad defensively, I would hold that against him a whole lot more. But this guy put up insane scoring numbers in the SEC night in and night out. He can really shoot it. at the very least, you're getting a guy that can really score the basketball.
Yeah, he's also my number 7. This is probably the only pick that we both had in the exact same spot. Like I like Knecht is just a bucket. Like I don't think you have to really think that hard about him. Like if you do have if the Pistons are number 5, for example, then he's there. Like I think that's a pretty easy pick to make depending on who else is there. But yeah, like dude's just a bucket. 46% overall on high volume. 40% from 3 on high volume. Got to the line 77%. Again, like high volume at the line too. Like he's a true 3-level guy. Not the greatest playmaker, but again, like if you just need an off-ball score, like you can put him next to Cade and feel pretty good about it. He's 6'6", like a good athlete too. Not the best defensively, but I think again, like if he could just be passable on that end, and you could just upgrade your, like your front court defense a bit more, you could probably get away with that. And he's just a bucket. Like I think you can just take him and you know exactly what you're getting, and he's a huge upgrade for a team that just needs everything, right?
Steven Suggs says Knecht can connect but can't create. Like I don't think you would draft, if you're drafting him to create, then no, like he shouldn't even be in the lottery if you're expecting Dalton Knecht to be your primary creator. I think he was actually overtaxed offensively at Tennessee because they didn't have anybody else that could really score. I don't think a team's going to put the ball in his hands and say, go get a bucket. I'm saying what he can do is he can knock down, catch and shoot threes. He can then attack closeouts. He is more athletic than what you would give him credit for. One of the kind of the roles is what Tim Hardaway Jr. was doing for the Mavericks at the start of this season. Not recently. Don't watch it recently because it hasn't been pretty, but just like comes in and he knows his role is to just absolutely get buckets. Dax Hoops asks, do you compare him to some of the Nova guys, older prospects, but doesn't have the same upside? I wouldn't. Dax Hoops, you bring up Brunson and Hart. He didn't come up in that system. He didn't grow it. Like that was my point. Listen, I played JUCO. I love the path, but you're not getting the same level of nutrition, weight program, defensive, like all of that stuff as you do at, say, 4 years of Nova or Kentucky or wherever. And even at Northern Colorado, it's still not the same as being at Tennessee. So my point is, I think there could be a little bit more upside because he hasn't been at one of those major programs for all of those years. Let's go to the next one. I think this is going to be one where we're vastly different. I have a feeling you're way higher on this guy. And number 8, I have Stephon Castle.
I struggled with him too, but I did end up with him at number 5. Okay. And it's interesting, like his stock really has bumped following the tournament, which I think just reaffirmed the stuff he was already good at. But he's just like, there's always a guy in the draft, right? He develops a shot, he becomes a star. And Castle and Ron Holland, to me, are really the guys who kind of fit that bill in this draft. I like Castle. Like he kind of reminds me a little bit of like Anthony Black last year. But I think even more like savvy and polished, like just really good, savvy defender. Could probably handle multiple roles on that end of the floor. He's just a guy that really, really competes. Like I thought he had so many big moments in the tournament, just as a leader, which really stands out. Really solid passer. Like he's big, like he's around 6'6", but I really do think he's like primary point guard type playmaker at the next level. The thing with him again is just the shot. He wasn't super high volume, and he also only shot it like 27%. So you look at him shooting 76% at the line, and that helps a bit. But he's not a guy that shot the 3 well. And he's not a guy that really gets to the line a lot either. So you kind of worry like offensively. It's weird because he still like can score, right? Like it's not like he's like a non-scorer. Like he can still get to the rim. Like he's got a good handle. He's got some juice to his game. I just don't see him getting anywhere close to a ceiling if he can't knock down open threes. And that's why I have him right at 5. But that's like a high 5. Like he's a guy that I may become lower on if he's not shooting it well through workouts. Yeah,
so I'll give my thoughts on Stephon Castle. Steven Suggs says, do you think Knecht or Ivy is better with Cade? Like the idea of what Dalton Knecht is makes more sense, right? Just because he's a floor spacer and all that. Now, listen, please do not aggregate this and say that I think Dalton Knecht is a better player than Jaden Ivey. Sometimes I get criticized for Jaden Ivey stuff. I feel like I'm the highest person in this space on Jaden Ivey. So that's not what I'm saying. If you're just saying fit and archetype, the archetype of Dalton Knecht probably makes more sense. YouTube user says Knecht or Javi Jaquez. I think they're different players. Jaquez was just like, did a little bit of everything. So savvy, makes like he plays in the mid post, all of that stuff. Jaquez not great defensively in the same way Knecht. I think the upside of Knecht scoring is probably a little bit more there. Stephon Castle, you hit it on it with the floor spacing. That it's concerning. Yeah. This is a guy I started scouting super early in this process out of high school. He was a little bit of a late bloomer. He really rose, the shooting was a concern back then, Omari.
Mhm.
What wasn't a concern back then was, or excuse me, another thing that was a concern back then also was the defense.
Mhm.
I'm insanely impressed with how far this kid has come on the defensive end.
Yeah.
He was incredible. He might be the best perimeter defender that we've talked about so far. Ron Holland does it with maybe a little more athleticism and energy. Stephon Castle can absolutely defend. And when you're not making shots the way he wasn't, for him to stay engaged the way he was really impressive. So I really, really like Stephon Castle. I don't think he makes sense for the Pistons because of that shooting concerns. We saw it play out where like teams just literally weren't going to guard him and he wouldn't shoot it at times. What do you think NBA teams are going to do? So I like it a lot. I wish he was, for his sake in general, I wish he was a little bit more of a true on-ball creator. I think that's what people thought he was going to be coming out of high school, and it really didn't come to fruition in his freshman season at Connecticut.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, is he a primary guy or is he more of like a secondary creator? I do think he has primary potential, but he's not like a true point guard passer where he's going to be dishing 3 assists for every turnover or anything. I think his assists turn up. He wasn't like a super high assist guy. He just, I think, controls the game really well. But what really worries me is that he does not have any sort of track record as a shooter at any stage of his basketball career. And, you know, there are guys everywhere. It's like, well, if they did this and that, they'd be so-and-so, right? And more often than not, those guys don't develop this and that. Like those are outlier skills to develop those types of things after you're drafted. So I like Stephon Castle a lot. I've been a bit surprised to see him rise to like top 3, even in like some circles. Like I'm not quite there yet. I have him pretty firmly in like that 5 through 10 range. But again, like I like the feel he plays with defensively. I think he's outstanding. Like teams do need those types of guys who could just really pester opposing teams, like a Jalen Suggs or like I mentioned, Anthony Black or like a Dyson Daniels. Even like those guys have the like utility in the NBA. I just want to see him knock down some shots from the outside.
And just to give him some credit, so he did get better throughout the season. The last 20 games, he was 30% on almost 2.5 attempts. And he had a 6-game stretch, I think it was end of January, where he made 44%, but it was just on 18 total attempts. So even the volume isn't there. But just to give him a little bit of love. Okay, let's go to number 9 on my board. And this is where I have the big man, Donovan Clingan. And I will say this. This is an instance where what he did in the Big East tournament and throughout the NCAA tournament, it rose on my board because it showed me things I was looking for and what I thought he was going to be coming into the season. And, you know, he battled some injuries and stuff like that. He had some games where he played major minutes, which is one of my biggest concerns with Donovan Clingan is how many minutes can he play within an NBA game? Where do you have Donovan Clingan?
Yeah, so this is probably our biggest gap. I have Clingan number 2.
I love it. Cool.
I have him number 2 behind.
He went number 2 in the most recent community mock that we did because I took Sarr at number 1 for the Pistons. Whoever was picking for the Wizards took Donovan Clingan. I think this, and to me, I would have thought about it for the Wizards. Like I probably would have taken Ron Holland, but Clingan may have been my number 2 guy for the Wizards in that scenario. So even though I have him 9, I essentially just said on the Wizards big board, I may have him number 3. So this is what this draft is.
Absolutely. I just think he is an absolutely transformational defender, like 7'7", just the instincts, like you combine that. Like I thought he improved a lot offensively as the season went on, where you're seeing passing flashes and just soft touch on the jump hooks. Obviously, he's a threat to dunk pretty much everything down there. Like he's the guy that you can build around to be. Like he has everything really except the shot. But when you have a guy who's 7'2" with a 7'7" wingspan, that's probably primarily playing in drop. You just commit hard to that archetype and then just surround him with shooting, right? Like I just look at Clingan and he just does so many things right. The only other thing that worries me about him is his free throw shooting, because you probably can get to the point to where you're playing hack a Clingan or whatever they come up with to play off of his name, just because he only shot like 56%, I think. But he's just such a transformational defender. Like he's just a guy I look at, and you combine that with just the feel he has on offense, and like he's my starting center for the next 10 years easily. Like I have very few question marks about the way he can impact the game.
No, I mean, there's real defensive upside with him. I think my biggest thing with him, and he had some flash plays in the Big East and the NCAA tournament, is his movement, his recovery ability. Because I think a lot of people will say, well, why not Zach Edey then, right? I just don't think their movement ability is the same.
Yeah.
There's also an age thing here, and I can already see the age. People are going to come at me about the age stuff. He doesn't turn 21 till next February. I looked at their sophomore year seasons between Edey and Clingan, and they were actually very comparable. And then Edey just exploded, obviously. And Edey, he did very well for himself as well throughout this season and through the NCAA tournament, getting himself into real first round conversation and considerations. I think he probably does end up being a first round pick as we sit here on April 22nd and talk about this. Clingan also, Omari, I think one thing that really helps him offensively, I think he passes the ball really well. I think that's his thing, and he passes the ball really well.
Not only that, he does not turn it over.
Yeah. And that's the thing with Jalen Duren. I don't mean to like all of a sudden we're really, so yeah, Steven Suggs says Clingan or Duren. I don't want to answer this. Do you want to answer that?
No, I'm not going to touch that right now.
Yeah, I'm not touching that right now. I do this on Game Theory. Sam tries to bait me into Jalen Duren conversations. Yeah. And this is the one where truly you can't play those two guys together, though. I mean, it would just have to be hey, we're going to play each of them 24 minutes a night, and we'll figure out which one is better. But yeah, I'm not touching that one right now. Like I say, Sam tries to walk me into those. I'm like, no, we're
not before you have to. Not before you have to.
Yeah. No reason on that one. All right. Number 10, I have Rob Dillingham.
Yeah. So I had Dillingham number 11, but
let's talk these last two. We had 10 and 11. We had Dillingham and Cody Williams.
Yep.
I would guess, my guess, Omari, we will get more conversation, whether they're texts, DMs, comments, whatever, about how low we are on Cody Williams than any other conversation we've had today, is my guess.
Probably so. And it's interesting because we kind of talked about this with Risacher, but it's one of those things where it's like the idea versus like where the player actually is. And I would assume that's probably why we're both a bit lower on them, even on paper. I also think he potentially could be a really good fit for the Pistons. It just depends on how much you buy into the aspects of his game he didn't really show. I
would say this about Cody Williams. I have him 11 on my board. He could get as high as 5th on my Pistons specific board, right? Because you're taking out Topic, you're taking out Ron Holland, you're taking out Rob Dillingham in most of these scenarios. So here's my thing with Cody Williams. I love a lot of the idea of who he is. I like his length. I think he's a very good defender. He is just 19 years old, turns 20 in November. The 3-point shooting, and I know the percentage is good, but he is another guy that would not take them.
Yeah.
I may be overcompensating or whatever for this, but I just struggled in so many games where I watched, and there was just a complete lack of aggressiveness at all. And that worries me, Omari, because it's like, okay, if you're already a little unaggressive in college, what's going to happen in the NBA? And maybe I will learn a lesson here. This is my first year, like truly going full in with this NBA draft scouting stuff, but I just can't get that out of my mind. How many times I watched him play. Now, here's what may happen. Maybe we'll hear the injury was lingering all year and that was holding him back. One final thing, Omari, I wasn't as high on Cody Williams coming out as high school as a lot of people as well. So that's another reason why I'm a little more comfortable keeping him lower, is I had him pretty low to start the season. He's actually really risen up my board, even at 11, because I didn't love the high school tape.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the reason why people do see him as like this top 7 or 8 guy is because of his brother. Like Jalen Williams was a late bloomer. He was 12th in his own draft. People didn't expect him to be as good as he has. And of course he came in and pretty much exceeded every expectation from day one. And I think people, to some degree are probably giving Cody Williams the same benefit of the doubt, where his trajectory will kind of resemble his brother's a bit. And in this draft, like I'm not mad at taking that shot at all, because I do think Cody Williams is a very fundamentally solid basketball player. It's just, if you are looking at what you want from a modern small forward, you want a versatile defense, you want some combination of versatile defense, playmaking, shooting, rebounding, right? Like you want like a Swiss Army knife. And Cody Williams is not really quite that. Like he did average 12 points a game on like 8 attempts. Like he was really efficient inside the arc. He did shoot about 42% from 3. But you talked about just sort of how passive he was and the reluctance. And he just took so few 3-pointers. Like you just don't know how much stock to put into it when he's taking fewer than 2 a game. Like you're creeping up on like non-shooter territory almost, especially
just based on volume.
Forward. Just based on volume.
Shoot whatever percentage you want. If you're only going to take 1.7, whatever.
Yeah, like that's just the volume is just so low. And on top of that, he didn't really stand out as a playmaker. He didn't really stand out as like a rebounder. Like his rebounding numbers really weren't that great. And you just gotta look at his overall, and it's like his best case to me is probably just based on what I saw. It's probably like a Trevor Ariza type, which again, like Trevor Ariza played what 18 years. He had a great career. Um, I just wish I had seen it from him, and I'm years to show things that he hasn't shown because just based on his tape, he looks like a pretty solid rotation wing, but not necessarily a guy who's going to swing any outcomes for you long term.
I mean, again, and so I think that's what I would love to know. Like, I would love to interview Cody Williams or watch film with him. Like, why didn't you take this shot? Why weren't you more aggressive here? And maybe he has all the right answers, Omari. You know what I mean? Like, that's the type of intel we don't get because we don't know why. Maybe Colorado didn't want him. Like, they had other really good players. KJ Simpson, incredible player, maybe the best college player on their team. Tristan Da Silva, talk about a dude that did well for himself in the NCAA tournament. He's a first round pick now after a big NCAA tournament. So, like, who knows some of the answers to these? I will say, I think there's a chance he's really good defensively, and I do think he has really good touch around the rim. And if for some reason he is able to fill out his body, that's not one of many reasons why Jalen Williams is so successful is because he's freaking jacked. Like, like if Cody is going to do that, if you tell me he's going to fill out his body and look like his brother 3 years from now, okay, I'm a lot more bought in. I came away a little bit concerned with some of that stuff, and it may just be a personal like preference thing as well. But again, I know Victor was hoping for a little bit more than this. He says, ugh, this draft is so hard to dissect. Listen, if you want Cody Williams number 3 on your board, I'm not going to argue with you. Like, I'm cool with not that like everybody's entitled to their opinion anyway. If you do your work, I'm all about it. It is really hard. Let's finish with this real quick, Omari. Caleb says, what do you think is this one skill that more often than not translates to the NBA? My initial thought was rebounding. I feel like that's one thing, Brandon Pajimski is a great example of this right now. This was a big time thing on his scouting report, and it's translated into his rookie season.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question to try to narrow that down to one skill. I would say if you were I would say just processing, and that's probably best reflected in maybe like assist numbers. Like I think a guy who could really move the ball in college and didn't turn the ball over a lot. Like to me, that just sort of points to like innate processing, and you're probably never going to struggle with turnovers in the NBA to the extent that some other guys do. I think rebounding, a lot of that can just depend on like athletic pop and position. I think shooting, like generally guys who shot pretty well in college on high volume can shoot in the NBA, but some guys just never adjust to the quicker pace or the longer line for whatever reason. I would go with assist numbers, like assist to turnover ratio. If you were a guy that was really efficient at that in college, like I'm going to trust you can do that at the next level and still be pretty good at it.
And he says, and second question, what skill often correlates to success in the NBA? And I would just say, if you saw the graphic going around on Twitter the other day, 3-point percentage correlates to success in the NBA. I sent it to Wes because he's like a data stats guy, and he said, he sent me like a paragraph. I'm not going to be able to read all of it, but essentially it was like, I always appreciate it, Wes. It was I believe he told me it's like kind of a floor raiser. Like anybody who was above league average from 3-point percentage was above 500 at the very least, So, and again, Wes and I, this turned into a Pistons conversation, Omari. You know what the Pistons weren't good at? Shooting threes. Yeah. They turned the ball over all the time, and they fouled a lot. Like
all the things you can't do.
All the things you can't do that I would call floor raisers. Like maybe you're not winning an NBA championship just because you do those things well, but I don't think you win 13 games if you do those things well. And they did all those things like 28th, 29th, 30th in the NBA this season.
Yeah. You know what was funny? Like just watching the Pelicans and Thunder. This is like this really tough defensive game where both teams had like 46 at halftime or whatever. And like one team had like 10 turnovers and never had 12 with like 4 minutes left for the fourth quarter. And I was like, this is what normal basketball looks like. Like it is abnormal to turn the ball over 16 plus times almost every single night. Like if these guys can start the game shooting below 40% in the fourth quarter, only turn the ball over that many times. Like that just shows how much more you have to improve in that.
It was funny. I was watching a game. I was like, man, this team is turning the ball over a lot. And they had like 10 in the third. I was like, oh, They don't have 8, because you're just so when you watch the Pistons and you're like, they've turned the ball over a lot, it's 20.
Yeah.
And it just seemed last thing, Avid Sports Reader says, I think you might be underrating Cody Williams with his frame and positional value.
And that's fair. Yeah.
I agree 100% with the positional value. That is fair. Like if you want to say there's no reason to have Reed Sheppard that high, Rob Dillingham that high, even Topic, I get it. I just think that there's going to be teams that do need those type of players. The frame would be an interesting conversation. Send me a DM or something, because I'm a little curious what you mean there in terms of just his length, or do you think like that he's definitely going to fill out? Because I do think he has good length, but if he doesn't fill out, there are some strength concerns. Caleb, last thing here, and then I'll let you take it away. Omari says, great insights, gentlemen. Always a pleasure hearing y'all talk ball. Y'all got me through the rough season. Looking forward to your content getting us through the summer. We appreciate that, guys. Thank you so much. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like, hit the subscribe. Help us continue to grow. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, again, 5-star rating. Leave us a review. Ashton dropped in again. Keep grinding, fellas. Thank you so much, Ashton. Join us anytime, my guy. And then, we love these, reviews and thoughts, and we appreciate it so much. It's going to be a fun off season. We're going to have a lot to talk about in the Pistons world. So if nothing else, it'll be good content, Omari.
No, we've talked about it, and just seeing how people stuck with it through this season, like, it really is gratifying. I had somebody on Twitter, I forget the context, but they were like, not like defending this past season, but they were like, I feel like Pistons fans are like spoiled because of the past success. And I'm like, I feel like half my followers on Twitter were not alive for their last championship. Like, this is like the least spoiled fan base in the league right now. And we really do appreciate
I do not think that's fair. This is that's
crazy, man.
It's the inverse of what I tell people when I'm like, oh, I'm a Chiefs fan, and they're like, oh, lucky you. I was like, no. Chill.
For a while.
I grew up a Chiefs fan. I watched all the crappy years. I watched them never have a good quarterback. I watched that when they did make the playoffs, it was some heartbreaking defeat where Andrew Luck fumbles it to himself and Marcus Mariota throws a pass to himself. I was like, no, Pistons fan base has been through it over the last how many ever years. So let's not go there with that.
Yeah, no, you guys stay tapped in. And this is going to be another crazy offseason. Like, I know we say this every offseason, but this is going to be another one. So continue staying tapped in with us. It'll be a lot of fun stuff to discuss. So with that, I'll close this out. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. And a big shout out to Wes as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.